Here's how to make two different types of cheese from raw milk, and it's going to be truly raw too because it's only going to be heated to 105 Fahrenheit. And you'll get the cultures from kefir grains. I'm going to show you how to make a raw mozzarella, and when I say a raw mozzarella, it's more like a mozzarella because one of the ways they make mozzarella is they pour boiling water over it, but there's nothing like that in here because, again, it's only heated to 105 Fahrenheit. And I think they also add citric acid to it, but I've never done that before, so hence the raw mozzarella. It's still flavorless. It's fairly flavorless, kind of like mozzarella is. And I'm also going to show you how to make a cultured version of the same thing, and I call it a wild cheese, or like a wild cheese. And the reason why is because most of the time it kind of tastes like feta, but there's like a flare of a secondary flavor throughout the year. So for example, let's say it's like July, and it's like I'm doing it in an 85 Fahrenheit room. It usually tastes kind of like a feta plus like a cheddar, but I've made it plenty of times, and I've had it also taste kind of like Parmesan and Colby Jack and all kinds of stuff. And most of the time, it tastes kind of like things that you can't buy in a store, but it's always really delicious though. That's why I call it a wild cheese, because the flavor changes all the time, and it's always delicious. You might be wondering why make my own cheese when I can just buy it in a store, and the reason why is because of health reasons. But before I go there, first of all, and this is everything stems from this. If you're in the US, last time I checked, which was around 2008, cheese that's labeled raw in stores isn't required to be truly raw. They're actually allowed to heat it 1 degree below pasteurization, and then they still call it raw. And the reason why that matters to me is because of health reasons. Long story short, I had a bunch of health problems that easily would have killed me if I was stupid enough to keep following the mainstream doctor's advice. Because of that, I got into this herbal cleansing thing, and I'm not going to go into huge details, but I killed off tons of parasites. I saw them in the toilet, and all these things happened to me that the average person would probably think, like, if I told them, you'd be like, dude, you're crazy. Like, it's all in your head. Like, no, it's not. I saw it, and I'll get to some of the details later on, but, or pretty soon. But, when I did that, I had done the doctor's, like, I don't want to go into my whole life story and blah, 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 all that stuff, but when I had followed the doctor's advice, I did his stuff for about 4 years, nothing happened. Then I did this herbal cleansing thing, and it basically saved my life in a month. And like 90% of my problems were gone after that. So yeah, 4 years of nothing and 1 month of something that actually worked. And I know how the natural health world is, there's all kinds of bullshit in there. For example, if I were to go to Whole Foods, I consider most of the stuff in there, like 90% of it, it's pretty much greenwashed bullshit. It's garbage is pumped out by some of these dumbass marketing teams using these stupid buzzwords to get you to think something's more important than it really is. And I hate that kind of stuff. So I know why people often have a lot of problems with the natural health world. But so yeah, some of the criticisms are valid, but it goes both ways. And basically after that herbal cleansing thing, I tried to be vegan, and that was really one of the dumbest things I ever did. The reason I say that is because right now I go between 145 to 150 pounds, and for me that's normal. But when I went vegan, I got down to less than 115, and I don't know the exact weight because at the time I had tons and tons more health problems. Or they just, after the cleanse, it was good, and then when I went vegan, it just got worse in certain ways because I got different problems. And basically I was in pain 24/7. I was constantly sore, tired, I was beaten up. My hands, feet, my knees, and my balls were always frozen and all that kind of stuff. And I eventually got to the point where I was less than 115, and I was too afraid to weigh myself then. And the times when I did weigh myself, I usually put my clothes on and my shoes and everything to make me, or to make me feel like, oh, I'm not super light, it's not that bad. You just kind of lie to yourself, like it's not as bad as it really is, but it was, and I didn't want to feel even worse than I did. So I eventually got to a point where I was like, okay, I have to change. So I did, and I eventually stumbled across this book called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration by Weston A. Price, and there's a cookbook too called Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon. I'll put them somewhere on the screen here. And the first one, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, that was written by a guy he was a dentist in the 1800s, and he went around the world trying to figure out why people had cavities and all these health problems. and eventually came to the conclusion, oh, it's just the modern diet. It was true. And a lot of stuff in that book, it goes completely against what the modern health system tells you to do. For example, he says to eat lots of raw milk and raw butter and so on and so forth, and eggs. And at the time, I didn't have a source of raw milk available to me, so I figured, all right, I'm just gonna go to the store and drink pasteurized organic milk. So I did, and pretty much anything I ate like that at this point, it was pretty much, for me, it was pretty much guaranteed acne, and it was the same thing with the cheese. And I also wouldn't gain any weight for it, so I didn't want that. And there's this one time where I drank ultra pasteurized milk, and what happened is my lips swelled up so they were like this big, and my eyes shut so they were kind of like this, and I could barely breathe. You know, and it scared the crap out of me, so I was like, yeah, I'm not doing that anymore. And eventually, I found a source of raw milk, and I started drinking it, and immediately I was just like, whoa. Very relaxed, very, very at peace. I felt really awesome. And then I started eating raw eggs, and eventually, when I did this, I gained about 20 pounds in 3 weeks, and I actually gained more, you know, from my less than 115 point. I actually gained more than that. I just didn't weigh myself until I started feeling the results consistently. But yeah, I did that, and for those who didn't do the math, that's more than a pound a day, which is really crazy. That's massive. And eventually, it just went from there. And I was like, you know, okay, if this stuff is so bad for me, you know, because the mainstream media, they tell you, and the doctors and all that crap, they say, oh, it's bad for you because of cholesterol, it's gonna clog your arteries. And at the time, I was 19. And yeah, I was like, yeah, you know, that's bullshit, because if it was so bad for me, why is it doing all this good? Why is it taking away my pains and my problems? And like, I would drink it, and like the next day, I would be like, my leg is longer, my hand is bigger. It literally made me grow. And there's this one time I didn't eat raw liver right away at first, but later on I did, and personally I don't like it. I'm not gonna talk about that in this video, but the first time I had liver, they were chicken livers, and I had tons of raw butter with it. That night, it felt like invisible hands were stuck down the center line of my face, and like they were popping it apart. It was like this pop, 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 pop. The next day, people who saw me all the time, they were like, you literally grew overnight. And things like that happened all the time. So because of all that experience, I realized these things have to be raw, or at least a whole lot of them, particularly raw milk. And they're the only thing that works. So that's why I eat these things raw, and why this kind of food matters to me. You know, if I were to go to like a Whole Foods or something, I consider most things in there, which is supposedly organic, it's not. But even the word organic is just it's a label that's misused. And same thing with all the other layers, like free range, grass-fed, and blah, blah, blah. Because I did that when I was at the point where I was trying to drink pasteurized and ultra-pasteurized milk, and it didn't work for me. Because of all that experience, I consider most things in the store, in like a Whole Foods store or whatever, mostly like 90% garbage. It's like dentist-approved organic cat candy with organic high fructose corn syrup, and then you got these dumbass doctors and whoever saying, oh yeah, it's totally good for you, trust me, bro. And these raw animal products, they didn't give me any acne at all or any problems. Like, you can get it, but you can get problems from it. Like, let's say one of the animals was sick. I mean, some of that's gonna be passed on to you, and you might have a sore throat or an earache or something like that, but that's literally happened to me twice over the past 20 years, and I've been drinking it since 2005. So, and I'm recording this on March 5th, 2025. So yeah, if they, as long as they took care of the animal right, it's okay, and it's usually not that bad. And I have my ways of dealing with that problem with nothing but plants, but I'm not gonna go into this video because, I mean, this thing's gonna get flagged and blacklisted anyway. I've been blacklisted for years, but I think you get the idea. So because of all that experience, I always make my own food from scratch, or at least like 99% of it. And there are times when I won't. Like, let's say I'm in a pinch and I really feel like some tortillas. I might go to the Whole Foods or whatever and buy some organic whole grain tortillas or whatever, but it's pretty rare. So besides all that, making your own cheese is fun, you learn a new skill, and you don't have to depend on big companies to make your food for you. And you can also make hard cheeses with this, and I'll put some images on the screen of stuff I've made before. But I don't want you to get involved in that yet, because if you don't understand the principles I'm going to teach you in this video, you're gonna have a much harder time dealing with those things. So nail this down first, and if you wanna delve into that kind of stuff, you can use a lot of the principles from here to do that, but just know that if you do it wrong, you're gonna get some problems. Like, for example, I'll have some images here of ones that I had that got moldy. And again, not gonna go into details, but nail this down, then do that if you want. It's not that hard to bridge the gap from there. And the point is, I don't want you to get sick, so yeah. And the only way I would make hard cheeses all the time is if I had something like a herd of cows or goats or sheep, and I wanted to preserve the milk right away, because as you're about to find out, this video is gonna be like over 30 minutes long or so. And it is a bit of work, but once you do it the first time, it happens way faster. It's just boom, 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 boom. But we'll get there later. So because of all this, before you watch this video, I want you to go watch the video I showed on how to make kefir. I'll put it somewhere on the screen, and I'll have a link in the description somewhere, depending on where you're watching it. And watch that from beginning to end first. Once you do that, come back here and watch this whole video from beginning to end. The reason why is because there's gonna be some terms in there that I'm gonna use, and I don't wanna repeat myself. It is pretty pointless. By watching that, you'll understand a lot more of what I'm trying to say in this video as well. And it's very important too, because if you do what I'm about to show you, if you do it wrong, you can get sick from it. And these directions are heavily leaning on the side of safety, but there is a possibility, and a lot of the examples I'm gonna give are hypothetical, or at least throughout this video, but there's still a chance, and I want to eliminate that possibility. So once you watch the video on how to make kefir, and from front to end, and then you watch this one from front to end, then make your decision on what you want to do, because like I'm going to show you various options and various paths you can take, really. And once you do that and you eliminate all the bad variables, your chances of getting a very good cheese are pretty damn high. And again, these directions are heavily leaning on the side of safety, and I want you to pay attention to that, because you can get sick if you do it wrong. But you should be fine as long as you follow my directions. So let's go. Before I start showing you everything you need to make this, I want to summarize everything first, because I'm about to go very in-depth on the whys, the hows, and so on, so you can do it safely. Because of the detail, sometimes you might feel overwhelmed and off track, but everything comes down to doing these 8 steps. 1. Make 10 cups of sour kefir whey. I'll show you how soon. 2. Split those 10 cups into 4 and 6 cups, and in the 6-cup one, dissolve 7 grams of salt per cup, which is 42 grams. 3. Heat 1 gallon of milk to 105 Fahrenheit. 4. Add your 4-cup set of sour kefir whey into that gallon of warm milk, not the 6-cup one with salt in it. And ideally, don't let your sour kefir whey touch any metal. I'll explain why later, but the gist of it is that I've had problems with it and it's not good. 5. Lightly stir it with your hand for a minute or 2, take the curds out, and squeeze out as much excess whey as you can with your hands. No need to go crazy. 6. Break your curds in your glass container into popcorn-sized pieces and pour the 6 cups of salty whey over it. 7. Cover the container with a cloth and rubber band and let it sit for 12 hours at room temp. Don't touch it until after that. 8. Strain it, squeeze out the excess whey with your hands, and eat. You can leave it in, but watch this full video to see the variations of what you can do though. Now, here's all your ingredients and tools. And this is all gonna be used for 1 gallon of cow milk. You can use other kinds of milk too, but I'm gonna use 1 gallon, and it should be the same for pretty much any kind of milk you're using, as long as it's from an animal. First, we have the salt, and the salt must not be iodized, otherwise it's gonna help prevent it from culturing. And this is a mortar and pestle. You don't need this, but I need to grind my salt down because it has pretty big chunks in it. And these are 2 digital scales. You're gonna want one, so I suggest you use it. And here's a digital thermometer. Again, you don't need this, but it will help you make future batches correctly. And here's a strainer. You don't need this, but it might help you. Here's some hemp twine I got from Walmart or wherever, and you don't need this. You'd be totally fine without it, but The reason I got it is because you might want it. You'll see later on. And here's a cutting board. You don't need this because I guarantee you're gonna make a mess doing all this stuff anyway, but it also helps me show glass things throughout here, so yeah. This is a 2-gallon glass jar. I suggest using this because if you use a pan, I've had problems with metal pans with really sour whey. I've had some pans that end up tasting like metal, and I don't want that. So that's why I use this glass jar. And here's the pan. I'm only gonna heat the milk in here to 105 Fahrenheit. Here's a ladle. This is only to help me make it so I don't make such a huge mess, at least when pouring the milk in, you'll see. And here's a bendy bowl. You don't need this, but it can help. And here's a flour sack towel. You're definitely gonna want one of these for helping you to strain the curds out because they are definitely better than cheesecloth. So you can get these at Walmart, or there are probably other stores. These are all 100% cotton. You can use whatever you want. I've used polyester stuff before, but just make sure it doesn't smell like chemicals. In here, I have 2 jars of extremely sour kefir whey, or rather it's roughly as sour as it can get. On the left, I have one that's 4 cups, and on the right is one that's 6 cups. And the reason I'm separating them is because the one with the 4 is gonna be used to curdle the gallon of milk, and the one with the 6 is gonna be used to culture it if you want that. And you'll be adding salt to the 6-cup one with 7 grams of salt per cup of sour whey. So here's how to make it. Everything I'm about to say will probably give you a lot of questions, so be sure to watch this fully before you do anything. Your questions will most likely be answered, but to help this along, remember that you're dealing with bacteria and yeasts. And to generalize, the bacteria will make your kefir sour, but the yeast will make it alcoholic. This will matter in a minute, depending on how you choose to do what I'm about to say, but just keep that in mind. And before I start, the reason I use sour kefir whey to make my cheese is because if I don't, then I have to use a lot of something like vinegar or lemon or lime juice. And if I did that, then the cheese is gonna taste like those things, and I hate that. I could also heat the milk up super hot, then add a small amount of those things so I wouldn't taste them, but then it's not gonna be raw. So I need enough sour kefir whey to do the job. Now let's get started. First, I want you to make kefir according to my video. And to summarize that, it's to ferment 4 parts of milk with 1 part of kefir grains, both by volume, in a room temp of about 70 Fahrenheit or hotter, and warmer is better for this. And let it go for 24 hours, but stir it lightly enough to dissolve it once every 8 hours. Although for making this kefir whey, I want you to keep going for 3 to 5 days at a bare minimum, but 5 to 7 is your best idiot-proof option that will give you the best results. After the first 2 days, you can stop stirring it once every 8 hours, but do stir it at least once a day from that point on. The only reason for stirring it is to help distribute the bacteria and yeast so they ferment the milk better and make it more sour. That would happen naturally, but stirring speeds up the process. Concerning how I just said to do this for 3 to 5 days at a minimum and 5 to 7 being better, the reason why is because longer ferments will make it easier to separate the whey from the curd, as I'm about to explain. So once you're done fermenting it to the point where it's very sour, strain out the grains and store them in the fridge in a glass jar with a plastic lid so it doesn't rust, because metal lids will. Don't touch this kefir, don't stir it, don't move it, leave it alone. The goal is to let it separate naturally like this over the next 3 days, and it will if you did it right. After those 3 days, if it's real good, you should see a nice chunk of yellow whey over the top of the white curd. Once you see this, pour off the yellow whey into another clean jar with a plastic lid, and you only want the yellow for making cheese. If you get a little of the white curd in there, then your cheese is gonna turn out a little more like kefir, but you need a lot for that to happen. A little isn't gonna do anything bad. Just keep it to a bare minimum. You can eat the resulting white curd however you want, so technically this video is sort of like 3 types of cheese to make, but I consider this kefir curd more like sour yogurt than anything. Just add honey, or maybe you want like garlic and dill or whatever. You can let it separate naturally at room temp too. Just put a cloth and a rubber band over the top and don't disturb it over the next 1 to 3 days until it separates. And again, warm temperatures for this separation are better. Same thing with the ferment too. No matter which way you choose, whether in the refrigerator or at room temperature, if you see a small amount of curd or cream that rises to the top, just scoop that off and eat it or leave it in there and pour out the whey into another clean glass jar. But if you scoop off a lot of curd that rose to the top, that's a sign that your kefir still has stuff in there that needs to ferment, so it's not gonna be sour enough and thus won't curdle the cheese you want to make as well as you could. Something like this is far more likely to happen if you only fermented it for a day or two. And ideally, you want all the curd from your kefir to fall to the bottom naturally, which is why I'm saying to go for at least 3 to 5 days, but 5 to 7 is safer. If you have this problem, all is not lost. Just scoop off as much curd as you can from the top and let your kefir grains sit in the whey at room temperature for a few more days. Stir at least once a day too. And if you ferment your kefir at a cooler temperature, it tends to not separate as good as you see here, but warmer temperatures do, such as above 70 Fahrenheit. For example, I've made kefir at cool temperatures around 60 Fahrenheit for about 7 days to get it as sour as I could, and it was. But when it was done, I've let it sit undisturbed for the next few days to separate, and it's in the same 60 Fahrenheit room, but it still wouldn't separate the whey from the curd, even though it was as sour as it could get. So try to do your ferments in a room temperature place above 70 Fahrenheit, then give it a few days to separate in the same warm place. Warm places always work better for this, so try to keep it above 70 Fahrenheit. And if it's still not separating, maybe you want to put it in an even warmer place. You might want to use one of those heat pads, just put it on there. I've seen that work. I've also taken the lid and wrapped a few pieces of cloth around the top so no dust could get in, and set it next to a warm vent. And that's always worked for me, but if you do that, try not to do it for any longer than a day or so, because having the lid on can carbonate it a little, and it might break your glass if it's not strong enough. And I'm telling you this from experience because I've made beer and alcohol and stuff like that before. Personally, I don't drink, but I have made it. And I'm telling you from experience that you can get exploding bottles, even with things like kombucha, which I've done plenty of times too. However you choose to separate your whey from the kefir curd, I suggest you make more of this whey much more quickly with the directions I'm about to give. The reason why is because you don't want to keep this in the fridge for longer than a week, otherwise it will start tasting more alcoholic. It will never be enough to make you drunk or even give you a buzz, but some of the natural sugars in the milk will be unfermented at this point, and when you deny open air to it because of the lid, the yeasts are going to eat it and make it taste more alcoholic. When you add that to the cheese to culture it later on, your cheese will taste alcoholic and it's nasty. And if you store at room temp for too long, even though there's open air, the same thing can happen if you don't stir it every day because some of the yeasts live at the bottom of the jar. You'll also evaporate it if you let it go for long enough. It gets real crusty around the edges and so on. This stuff is really nothing more than the powdered whey sold in stores with some cream that I never separated, only that it's fermented and it oxidized a little so it doesn't look pretty. Technically, you can eat this, but I don't because it looks nasty and it's not like this is gonna fill you up, and this is also why I don't wait a long time at room temperature. I usually just collect everything I need and do it all in one go. So if you saved up some whey and it gets alcoholic, you can fix that by letting it sit in the open air with a cloth and rubber band around the top for a few days and stirring it a few times a day. But like I said, I prefer to make a large amount of whey all at once so I don't have to deal with that problem. So let's assume you have a few cups of sour kefir whey, or even just kefir for that matter. That'll be easier to deal with, to do this example. You can use what you just made to help ferment more of the other, more quickly. For example, if I had a very small amount of kefir grains, let's say you bought from me and you got 2 tablespoons, which is those 2 tablespoons are also 1/8 of a cup. And let's say I wanted to make more kefir much more quickly. What I would do is I would add this 1/2 cup of kefir into another 1/2 cup of fresh milk, which is a 1-to-1 ratio, plus all my kefir grains. Then I would let it go for another day, stirring once every 8 hours again. Then I'd keep adding more fresh milk in a 1-to-1 ratio until I had a decent amount every day. The only problem with doing this is that it usually doesn't turn out as silky and smooth as the directions I gave for making kefir. It's quite often like a point between kefir and crappy cheese. Like, you can do it and it'll be all right, but as long as you feed your grains every day over the next month or so, and you don't need to wash the jar every day, all you have to do is just scrape down the walls with your hands, your clean hands, or a spatula, then they go pretty fast. So on day 1, I'd have 1/2 cup, 2 days would give me 1 cup, 3 days would give me 2 cups, 4 days, 4 cups, 5 days, 8 cups, 6 days, 16 cups, 7 days, 32 cups, and so on. So if I wanted a lot of kefir whey very quickly, and I only had 2 tablespoons of kefir grains to do it, I'd go about 7 days so I could get 32 cups, which is 2 gallons, then stop adding anything more in, and let it sit for at least a week so it could get as sour as it could, and making sure to stir it at least once a day during that time, after the initial ferment. But more is better. Then I do all I said before to separate it. And the reason this works is because the kefir I just made helps kickstart the ferment of the fresh milk. It's just that if you want to drink kefir from this, it's much more unlikely to turn out as silky and smooth as the directions I gave you. So if your whey is about as sour as lemon juice, it should work fine. And here I am just weighing my salt out, and because the salt is like, there's huge chunks of salt, I grind it down in mortar and pestle, and then I put it in the 6 cups of sour kefir whey, and that is 7 grams of salt per cup, so that's about 42 grams. And I didn't get it perfectly exact, just get it roughly the same, and it'll be fine. And you always want to dissolve it before you're ready to culture it, so before you're ready to heat the milk and all that. All right, now what I'm doing here is I'm heating up my 2 jars of sour kefir whey, as well as the big 2-gallon glass jar that I'm gonna curdle everything in. And the reason why is because I want those as close as possible to the 105 Fahrenheit that I want the milk at, otherwise it's not gonna curdle so well. And when you take the jar out and dry it out, it's gonna cool down a little bit, but the point is to just get it warmer. It doesn't need to be 105 Fahrenheit, just get it warm. For me, that was very important because right now it's winter and it's like 50 Fahrenheit in certain parts of my place, so yeah. And when you heat up your milk, I want your finger in the milk at all times. So you're gonna pour your milk in, turn the heat on all the way, stick your finger in, and also stick the thermometer in. Right now, I'm doing it with one hand. I suggest you do it with, I suggest you have one thermometer in one hand and your finger, just stir with that and with the other. And I would have done that here, but the camera was in the way, so yeah, it would have been an awkward position. So just stir it until it gets to 105 Fahrenheit, then take it off the stove. So once it's 105 Fahrenheit, I'm gonna start ladling it into this jar. And this jar is not 105 Fahrenheit. It's probably more like, I'd estimate like maybe like 80. But I'm gonna ladle this stuff in here because if I were to pour it all at once, I'm gonna spill it all over the place. As you'll see, I'm gonna make a mess anyway, but it's better when I do it this way. So I dump it all in, and once it's in, I immediately want you to take your 4 cups of sour kefir whey and pour it in. And I want you to take your clean hand and slowly move it around. You don't have to go super slow, but you're gonna start feeling like this stringiness in your fingers, and you're gonna see it right away too, just like you'll see here. And give it about a minute and it will start clumping up. You'll be able to start pulling it out and it's gonna look a bit stringy. This is the mozzarella I was talking about. If you want it right here, you could just put it in a bowl, add salt to taste and eat it. Or you can just eat it without any salt, up to you. This is basically done if you want the mozzarella. But because I'm gonna culture mine, I'm gonna wait for about a minute or two, and then I'm gonna start using my hands to collect the majority of this curd, and I'm gonna put it in the pan on the side, the empty pan on the side, just to get it out of the way. And then I'm gonna take my excess, put it in this bowl with this strainer, and kind of hop it around to get the excess out, the excess whey out. And you can also keep this whey if you want and ferment it with, so you can just toss your kefir grains in there and let the excess sour, and let the sour whey that you already dumped in help kickstart the fermentation of all of the rest of it. And just let it go for another 5 days or so. The reason you might want to do that is if you want to keep making cheese, because once you have the initial 4 cups, it'll make future batches a lot easier to make, because you've roughly like, it's almost like 3/4 of a gallon maybe. I also save this stuff and then ferment it so I can use it for cheese if I want it, or I just drink it because it's very refreshing, kind of like Gatorade. You can do a lot of other things too with this. You can ferment various drinks, like let's say you wanted to make like a natural soda, but I'm not gonna go into that now. All right, once you have the curd, I want you to take it, make sure you hand squeezed out as much whey as you could. This is for your safety. I'll get there in a minute. So put it back in the jar you have, and I want you to break it all into popcorn-sized pieces. You really don't want big pieces because the sourness of this whey, of the 6 cups of kefir whey you're about to pour in here, that's gonna help protect it. And you want to get it as sour as possible, as fast as you can. And this is gonna be very, when I say sour, it's more like sharp. This is gonna be kind of like a feta, but the flavor can change depending, like I was saying earlier on, depending on the time of the year. But you want the sourness of this whey to penetrate into the cheese much more easily than if there's already an existing amount of whey there that was not fermented. So when you get the unfermented stuff out, it's safer because the sour stuff is gonna take over. Here's an analogy. The unfermented whey is like this. Let's say you were eating some clean food and you spilled it on a dirty carpet. You can salvage the parts that weren't made dirty by cutting or washing it off, but you have to throw the rest away, then clean up the place, or else it's gonna start smelling bad and might make people who live there sick due to the mold and stuff that's eventually gonna grow on it. In this scenario, the sour kefir whey is someone who cleans up the whole place and prevents bad stuff from growing because the acidity of it prevents that. So if you don't do this, and you don't wait enough time, then there's a higher chance of you getting a sore throat, an earache, or whatever it may be. That's because when you drink raw milk, you have to remember that it's still raw, and damn near everybody who drinks it knows that there's a chance it might have some bad bacteria in it. But we all keep doing it because we all know the massive benefits it made in our lives. And if you're in a state like mine, which is Illinois, as I'm saying this, it used to be illegal to sell. Back then, we'd still get it by signing a waiver, then join a cow or goat share, so the farmer is just paying us for delivery of a product we already own. So again, you always want to get your whey as sour as it can. If you were to make a hard cheese, that's why by law, at least the last time I checked, any cheese labeled raw in the US is required to be aged for at least 60 days before selling it. That's because with those cheeses, the acidity has been raised for long enough to kill off any bad stuff in it. Which again is why I told you to get the whey as sour as you can get it. I'm just trying to replicate that as fast as I can for you. So if your raw milk has questionable quality, your most likely bet is that it's because of the way it was delivered or stored. For example, I've been picking up my raw milk from various drop-off locations since 2005, and some of those places have had no one there, and you pay by the honor system. That means that a farmer collected the milk, stuck it in his refrigerators, and dropped it off in their fridges on someone else's property a week later. Then me and others would show up at random times, stick some cash in an envelope, put it in a box, take our stuff from one of the fridges, and leave. And because other people come there too, and some of them might be new customers, when they open the fridge, they might not close it all the way. So if they did that, then the owner of the property walked by and noticed it a day and a half later, and I came a day after that, so it's basically been sitting in a warm room for 2 days, but I got it when it was cold again, then the milk is much more likely to cause a sore throat by the time I get it. And that's especially true if I were to make cheese with it. Which, if you watched my How to Make Kefir video, that's one of the reasons why I tell you to use the ratios I do, the 4-to-1 ratio, because that will help prevent it even if there's a bad situation like that. Or maybe the fridge broke or wasn't cold enough to begin with, and so on. There's a lot of variables. Point is, to evade those variables, you always want to get it on the same day and time of the drop-off. That will give you the best chance to not cause you a problem. Ideally, you want your animal milked on the spot and to make the cheese right away, but most people in the US don't have that luxury. In fact, if you had that, you could ignore most of the warnings, most of the steps I said to this point. You could just milk your animal, pour your sour kefir whey in, and then have your cheese within minutes. Because it's so fresh, there's about 0 chance anything bad could have grown. Sorry for that huge rant, but details are important. So to recap, now that you have your curds, you squeezed out as much whey as you could by hand, and you broke them into popcorn-sized pieces, you have 2 options. I'm going to show you the wild cheese first because it's safer and tastes better, but that's your call. Just pour your 6 cups of sour kefir whey, which had the 7 grams of salt dissolved per cup in it, which is 42 grams, and pour it over your popcorn-sized curds. Then just put a clean flour sack towel over it, or you can use an old t-shirt too if you want. put a rubber band around it, and let it sit for 12 hours. Stick it at a room temperature place. And after that, it's done. If you want, you can strain it out, store it in a jar in the fridge. And I really want to emphasize, again, to make sure you go no less than 12 hours. Otherwise, you're more likely to feel a problem. But if you leave it at room temperature, make sure you have a flour sack towel and a rubber band to cover it. And make sure it's fully submerged in the same sour kefir whey. And scoop out what you want every day with a clean utensil. And since there are yeasts in there that will ferment at both the top and bottom and probably throughout it, I'm telling you from experience that you're probably gonna wanna eat it within a week, otherwise you're more likely to start tasting alcoholic cheese, and that tastes pretty nasty. For that reason, you also ought to squeeze out the excess whey with your hands before eating, and that's whether you stored it in the fridge or at room temperature. You can also use a cheese press to squeeze it out, but that's pretty useless because this isn't being waxed and stored like a hard cheese is, so it's kind of a waste of time. And it'll actually last longer than a week in the fridge or a week at room temperature, but again, when you're dealing with live cultures from kefir grains, again, you have to remember that there are some yeasts in there, and when they're denied oxygen over a long enough time, they will ferment any existing natural sugars in the milk and turn it into alcohol. I've had this stuff last for a month in the fridge, and it could probably go longer, but I just ate it. But when you get to that point, the flavor is nasty, so I wouldn't go for any longer than that. I've tried various things to get rid of the yeast in it, but none of them worked. For example, if you wanted to make wine, you can actually just get a bunch of grapes, grind them up, stick them in a jar that stops air from getting in but letting gas escape, let it sit for about a month, and then you get wine. I'm simplifying that process, but you get the idea. That happens because all the yeasts ate the sugars, and at that point they either A, ate all the food, meaning the sugars, or B, raised the alcohol content high enough that they basically committed suicide. And again, I'm simplifying this process, but you get the idea. So relating that principle to the yeast in this milk from the sour kefir whey, one thing that I tried to get rid of all the yeast was just making kefir, getting it super sour, separating the whey from it, and letting it go for a couple months in a warm place like 70 to 100 Fahrenheit. And remember, it needs access to the open air, otherwise it wouldn't get sour, which is the main part I want. The sour part, the cultures. That's where most of the flavor comes from. Yeast help too, as well as with the texture, but again, I'm simplifying this. But the problem then was that it would evaporate so much and it would eventually change into more of a dull orange color. In one of the images I showed earlier on is the result. I'm sorry I didn't take a picture of the color of the whey there, but what you see on top is a combination of the top fermenting yeast and some of the cream that never got separated and it just floated to the top. And even after about 2 months of letting it ferment, one whiff and it still smelled like alcohol and cheese. And I was stirring this every day, like hoping, hey, I'm gonna get more air exposed to it, so it's just gonna kill off the yeast, right? But apparently not. I'll bet there's an easy way to separate the yeast from the souring bacteria because companies do sell culture packets for making cheese. And when I've tried those, there was never any alcoholic smell to them. But I don't know how to separate the natural yeasts in the sour kefir whey from the souring bacteria yet. And I figure since they're in there naturally, it's probably for a reason and most likely good for you because it can help you digest the food you eat, since the bacteria and yeasts do a lot of the digestive work for you. That's just one reason why I keep making it this way, and I just eat it within a week because it's too good to leave it sitting around. Here's how you store your mozzarella. I suggest you eat it the same day on the spot. And again, there are other ways I know of making cheese. I'm just giving you the one I know that is the least likely to cause you any problems. And the reason why I would rather you eat it on the spot is because the acidity hasn't been lowered like the wild cheese has, so you have a greater chance of it giving you a slight problem. Then again, that also depends on the freshness of your raw milk, and there's no way I can determine that for you over the internet. But a good general rule is this: if you ate some of this mozzarella right away and it didn't cause any problems due to the situations I just spoke about, then weigh out your cheese curds, add 2% of its weight in salt, mix it up, and store it in a glass jar in the coldest spot of your fridge. Eat it within a week. I've done it like this before and I've let it go for 2 weeks, but again, you really need fresh milk for that. You can't do it with questionable stuff. So thanks for watching. And if you want some kefir grains, I might have some for sale. Just go to the shop page on my site and check it out. The number will be listed there. Okay, thanks, bye.